This little bub, Mohammed, similarly to Angela, he was a child for whom state and positioning seem to be very closely connected and closely linked, which is why I put these two cases together. He's not now, but he was a little baby with Down syndrome. He was 7 weeks old when he came to us initially. He had a mild heart defect, in that he did have a heart defect, but they were using a bit of a wait and see approach to see how that resolved on its own. His cardiology team. He had Down syndrome, and associated with that, as we know, is issues with tone. So he was a floppy little bub. Mum was doing her best, trying every avenue to feed this baby. She was maintaining some breastfeeding, which she was really not happy to share with me, but she was doing that, particularly during the nights at that time. And she had had some success with that in the early weeks. She tried to continue to express breast milk with some success, but she had started to rely more and more on formula because of supply and all that kind of stuff. She was really concerned, as we all were, because he really wasn't gaining weight. Was it because he wasn't getting enough breast milk? All of that kind of thing was not clear at the time. On bottle feeding assessment, his seal was really weak. Here, his tone was really weak, so his seal on the bottles that they were using was not good, which meant that the vacuum part of his sucking was really weak, and so that just made his whole suck deteriorate. He was losing a lot out of the front and only taking 30 to 50 mils per feed, which was really not enough. He would get quite puffy during feeds and quite terrifyingly would turn a little bit blue around here. And he had a lot of trouble keeping that rhythmic, or he could sometimes establish that rhythm, and then it would fall apart quite quickly. Another massive factor for this family was maternal grief. We deal with that a lot with the families that we work with. I'm sure people have been in that situation where the grief is, quite overt and out there. And I mean, Julie in the video this morning talked about her grief, but with this family it was particularly marked. She didn't know the baby was going to have Down syndrome, and then it was born with Down syndrome, and she didn't understand what that was, and there was cultural implications for that kind of thing. So in assessment, what was working for Mohammed? Well, he wasn't refusing feeds at this point. Although his feeds were falling apart and were really difficult, he would always take a bottle. He was never turning away. And his cues were quite clear that when he wasn't coping, you could really see that, so that was good. What was not working? Pretty much everything else. Yeah. Mum was really motivated to improve things, obviously, but she was very stressed and she was having trouble working out what was going on. Position and state. Bub was flopped out, actually would go on this side, flopped out, head back, fluid coming out everywhere. Wrapping him up and positioning him first made a huge difference to him, and that was great. For the first couple of weeks, we had to work on the flow rate. Was it flowing too fast? Was it flowing too slow? Did he have to work too hard on a slower flow? Was the fast flow drowning him? That we needed to work out. We found that with the faster flow and giving him some breaks seemed to work, but it wasn't 100%. We did a lot of mucking around with this kid's bottle feeding abilities to try and find a solution that would work. We tried a Haberman teat for a while, so to capitalise on his compression as opposed to his vacuum part of his suck. The Haberman was good for that for a little while. We then moved to sideline, which worked quite well with Mum because she had another baby who was about 14 months old at the time, and she was wanting to feed the two babies on the floor. So the side lying on a mat on the floor. So the side lying for Mohammed worked quite well then. Then we went through the whole jaw and cheek support situation when he was a little bit bigger, and did find that quite a soft teat with a wide base that would kind of sit in there and plug that seal was what was going to work. So my message to you in that whole mess there that was, well, it wasn't a mess, it was systematic, but it looks like a mess now that I look back on it, was that it's important not to be too risk averse, to be willing to try something if you think something's not working or if you think it can work better. Try. Trial and error is a large part of the work. So we improved his postural support. And over time and with growth and physio, his head control and trunk stability improved a lot, and that made a huge difference. So as he grew, he improved, which was good. We introduced the cup really early to him because his sucking wasn't great. So we did the early cup experiences with thickened fluids, encouraged lots and lots of oral play with toys. So stick it in your mouth, and worked with the OT on that kind of thing, picking things up and putting things in his mouth. Different textures, different temperatures, playing in the mirror, really encouraging that oral exploration during play and imitation. We introduced solids that way during the food play initially when he was about 4.5 to 5 months old. So putting food onto his toys that he was mouthing and introducing solids that way, doing lots of tasting and turn taking. And we encouraged a lot of different types of utensils right from the start. That's good not only for sensory exploration, but when children are curious and are using their mouths to explore, that's like automatic oromotor exercise, right? And they're doing it themselves. They're jamming stuff in and they're moving their tongue to feel it, and they're doing it all on their own. It's fantastic. He was always included in family meals, very important, and we totally encouraged his independence in feeding right from the very, very beginning. The research is clear on that self-feeders do better. So the earlier you can implement that kind of independence at meal times, the kid has more power and control, and they achieve, which is great. Now he's nearly 2. He's a big boy. He didn't need surgery, as it turns out, which is fantastic. He's walking now, which is good. He's a very healthy weight for his height. He's a tiny little fella, but he's doing really well. He eats heaps of food, including age-appropriate finger foods nowadays, and he is a largely independent, albeit extremely messy eater. And he's drinking independently from an open cup. Yay! I'm running a little low on time. Kay Toomey says, and I'll try and summarise it because it's a long quote, but basically, whether the child has a physical problem or a behavioural problem, they can influence each other. So really what's the most important thing in combating any childhood feeding disorder of any etiology is to ensure that you're always providing opportunities for experiences at the level the child can tolerate at that particular time, regardless. And the development of trust is the key. We have a particular complication in working with kids with severe developmental disabilities is that cognition is an issue. Kids learn a lot better by doing. So the experiential side of therapy becomes more important. Marsha Dunkline, I watched a webinar of hers the other day, and she's talk about the sensory properties of the carrot. And I'm like, I don't think so. The kid really needs to experience the sensory properties of the carrot in this situation. It does take longer, the interventions, when you can't talk them out, and the steps might need to be smaller, but essentially the approach is quite similar. That's my elder 2. I'm just getting into this whole division of responsibility now. Ellen Satter's approach, so the parents decide what the children eat, and the children decide if they eat it and how much. It's a great philosophy. I've tried to implement it at home, not so successfully, but I do like the principles that it encourages you to consider, which is power and control at mealtimes and how important that is for kids in building the trust relationship in feeding. Finding a way to say have another bite without saying have another bite. So make it interesting. Don't say you're not leaving the table until you've finished this. Say, oh, would you like a blue spoon? Or how about you try, the red spoon? Or do you want me to feed you? Or do you want to do it yourself? Is that crunchy? Make it interesting. Encourage that internal, intrinsic motivation to eat rather than making it. And see what happens when you get your kid to self-feed. It's messy. But they learn skills.